Under the hum of the aircraft engines aboard Air Force One, President Donald Trump addressed a small group of reporters, his tone deliberate and firm. He confirmed that the United States would not reopen tariff negotiations with Canada, a statement that immediately reverberated across both economies. The setting was Joint Base Andrews, where Trump's remarks came at the close of an eventful week in U.S. trade policy. The president's comments underscored a sense of finality that Washington had long hinted at but never explicitly declared. Trump began by reaffirming his personal rapport with the Canadian leadership, even as he made clear that cordial ties would not translate into policy concessions. "You know, I have a very good relationship with him. I like him very much," he said, referring to Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney. "But you know, what they did was wrong." He was very nice. He apologized for what they did with the advertising because it was misleading advertising. It was exactly the opposite. Ronald Reagan liked the tariffs customs officers and they tried to make it look the other way, and he apologized, and I appreciated that. Those remarks, carried live by the press pool aboard the aircraft, followed an unusual episode in recent weeks. Ottawa had launched an anti-protectionist campaign emphasizing free trade and economic openness, which some US officials interpreted as a direct challenge to Washington's tariff stance. The campaign included televised messages and print ads comparing past American presidents' policies, implying that the Trump administration's trade actions deviated from long-standing US economic traditions. According to the White House, the president considered those claims misleading, particularly the reference to Ronald Reagan, a figure often invoked by conservatives to justify protectionist measures when they served national interests. Trump's insistence that the apology was appreciated but insufficient signaled the administration's hardened posture toward any new bilateral talks. Despite Carney's conciliatory gestures, including a direct apology for what he called a regrettable miscommunication, the White House remains intent on keeping the current tariff structure in place. The president's message was clear: personal respect would not override perceived economic wrongdoing. As Air Force One climbed toward cruising altitude, Trump's words seemed to crystallize his broader trade philosophy, one that places loyalty and national self-interest above traditional multilateral diplomacy. He portrayed Canada's campaign not merely as an advertising misstep, but as part of a deeper misunderstanding of American trade principles. The reference to Reagan was deliberate, an effort to reclaim the legacy of protectionism as a tool of strength rather than regression. For Trump, tariffs are not temporary bargaining chips, but instruments of national leverage. His administration has consistently framed them as a means of restoring industrial balance and shielding domestic producers from what he often calls unfair foreign competition. In this view, any attempt to question that policy, especially from an allied nation, risks being interpreted as an affront to American sovereignty. The president's message from Air Force One reinforced that perception. It was not just a rejection of renegotiation, but a reassertion of control over the trade narrative. Back in Ottawa, officials sought to temper the fallout. Prime Minister Carney's office released a brief statement emphasizing Canada's continued commitment to dialogue and mutual respect. It noted that the Prime Minister has apologized for any misunderstanding caused by recent advertising and reiterated that Canada values its trade partnership with the United States. Yet the underlying tension was unmistakable. Washington's unwillingness to re-engage on tariffs left Canadian industries, particularly aluminum, dairy and auto parts, facing continued uncertainty. Analysts describe the exchange as emblematic of the broader shift in US foreign economic policy. Over the past several years, Washington has steadily moved from large multilateral frameworks to transactional bilateral engagements driven by perceived national gain. In this case, the president's personal diplomacy style was on full display, friendly on the surface, yet unyielding in substance. He drew a sharp distinction between individual goodwill and policy leniency, maintaining that while he respected Canada's leadership, the US would act solely on its own economic terms. Economic observers point out that the decision to shut the door on new tariff discussions may have broader implications for North American supply chains. Many sectors, from automotive manufacturing to agriculture, depend heavily on cross-border coordination. Any sustained tariff regime could raise production costs and further strain relations between business communities on both sides of the border. The US Chamber of Commerce and Canadian manufacturers have already warned that continued restrictions could discourage investment and erode competitiveness against Asian and European rivals. Within the United States, the move plays well among domestic producers who have long supported Trump's America First agenda. Farmers, steelworkers, and manufacturers in key electoral states remain among the administration's most vocal backers. They view the tariff policy as a defense of American labor, even if it drives short-term price fluctuations. At Joint Base Andrews, Trump's language reflected that populist tone, pragmatic, self-assured, and dismissive of what he often calls globalist pressure. Meanwhile, opposition voices in Washington and Ottawa have characterized the standoff as a step backward for North American integration. Critics argue that it undermines the spirit of cooperation that defined the post-NAFTA trade architecture. Economists warn that in a time of global economic volatility, closing dialogue channels with a close ally risks creating ripple effects far beyond tariffs, from energy pipelines to digital trade and cross-border investments. Still, Trump's comments aboard Air Force One leave little room for ambiguity. His administration views any apology as a matter of etiquette, not economics. Policy, he suggests, must be earned through concrete concessions, not diplomatic niceties. The president's mention of Reagan, a symbol of conservative strength, underscores his effort to root protectionism in American tradition rather than depict it as a deviation. Ronald Reagan loved tariffs, he said pointedly, framing them not as restrictions but as expressions of national pride. The exchange encapsulated a broader theme running through US trade diplomacy, the redefinition of friendship in transactional terms. For Trump, allies are partners only as long as their actions align with US priorities. Carney's apology, though courteous, did not alter that calculation. In his view, Canada had crossed a symbolic line by questioning America's trade narrative, and the president's response was to reassert economic authority through firmness rather than flexibility. As the plane continued its flight, aides briefed reporters on background, confirming that there were no plans for additional negotiations. The message was consistent with recent policy steps: maintain existing tariffs, enforce compliance, and discourage what the administration considers symbolic grandstanding. Trump's advisers, echoing his words, said the president appreciated Canada's respectful approach, but emphasized that the era of easy renegotiation is over. By the time Air Force One touched down later that evening, the global headlines had already begun circulating: Trump closes door to new tariff talks. For some, it was a predictable stance from a leader known for his hard bargaining. For others, it signaled a worrisome escalation of economic nationalism at a time when cross-border cooperation remains critical for recovery and stability. In Canada, the political debate has already reignited. Lawmakers are pressing Carney to clarify what form of apology was offered and whether it might be perceived as an admission of fault. Opposition figures accuse the government of mishandling the situation, saying it underestimated the symbolic sensitivity of American trade politics under Trump. Supporters of the Prime Minister argue that maintaining an open line with Washington, even in disagreement, remains essential for Canada's long-term interests. For Trump, however, the issue appears settled. His closing words to the travelling press summed up the administration's outlook: respectful engagement but no retreat. His tone was confident, his phrasing deliberate, a reminder that in his presidency, diplomacy often moves at the speed of his conviction. The US may maintain cordial ties with its northern neighbour, but as far as tariffs are concerned, the door is shut for now, firmly and on America's terms.